Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. This episode shifts backwards and forwards between different timelines and contexts. The opening starts with Edward Bernays, an American pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda, whose techniques have been criticized for manipulating public opinion, often in ways that undermined individual autonomy. Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. A cigarette glows in the dim afternoon light, its ember flaring as a woman lifts it to her lips. The filter presses softly against her skin, a barrier, a refinement, a subtle improvement on the rawness of tobacco. She inhales, exhales, a slow plume of smoke curls into the city air, a camera shutter clicks. The moment is captured, immortalized. Tomorrow, newspapers will print the image beneath bold headlines: torches of freedom, a performance of rebellion, an illusion of autonomy. But she knows exactly what she is doing. She has been placed here, positioned for this shot, chosen for the way she embodies a movement that has already been designed. She is not merely smoking, she is performing freedom, an image of power that will be sold as if it were hers all along. Edward Bernays does not appear in the photograph. He does not need to. His work is already done. The image will travel, carrying its message invisibly, seamlessly. Women who once saw cigarettes as unladylike will come to see them as symbols of liberation, proof of autonomy. But the meaning is not theirs to decide. The cigarette, held between fingers, raised to lips, is both a gesture of self-expression and a silent advertisement. 100 years later, another woman performs a similar gesture. The glow is not from a cigarette, but from a phone, illuminating her face as she stands on a crowded street. The camera opens, the beauty filter activates automatically. It does not distort, at least not in an obvious way. It refines, it perfects, it creates a version of her that aligns subtly with the silent expectations of the digital world. A different kind of filter, a different kind of refinement. She lifts the phone, framing the shot. She is not selling anything, not in the way advertisements once did. She is simply sharing her thoughts, her presence, a moment that feels effortless. But like the woman a century before, she knows exactly what she is doing. The video is casual but intentional. The angle is adjusted just enough to flatter, the lighting set to enhance without appearing staged. The filter, smoothing and sharpening, remains unseen. She is not holding a product, yet the image works exactly as it is meant to. The brand she wears, the cafe behind her, the city's hum in the background, subtle cues of aspiration and relatability embed themselves in the frame. She is not performing an ad, she is simply being herself. And yet, her presence carries the same persuasive weight as the campaigns of a century ago. The difference is that now she does not need a Bernays. She has learned to do it herself. No one instructs her, no campaign directs her choices. But she has learned, as the women before her learned, what works. She has studied the patterns, felt the weight of engagement, the subtle pressure of what gets amplified, what disappears. The feedback loop is invisible but relentless. She adjusts, she refines, she performs. A century ago, the cigarette was both a statement and a product, an act of personal expression that carried the quiet logic of advertising. Today, the gesture has changed, but the structure remains. A man turns the dial on his television, the static dissolving into the familiar order of the evening news. 3 networks, 2 local stations, limited choices, but choices nonetheless. He believes in his agency, in the small act of selecting which version of the world he will see tonight. Walter Cronkite's measured voice fills the room, delivering the day's events with an authority that feels unshakable. He does not question why these stories and not others. He does not ask who decided what was important, what was worth seeing. The news arrives fully formed, assembled before it reaches him. His perception of reality has been shaped, but the process is invisible. He does not feel the construction. He trusts it because it appears whole. 50 years later, the dial is gone. The screen is endless, stretching beyond the constraints of programming schedules and designated time slots. He no longer selects, he scrolls. Content flows toward him, fluid, shifting, adapting. He no longer waits for the news finds him. His choices feel infinite. He can access any perspective, any voice, yet the system is watching him as closely as he watches it. Each pause, each hesitation of his thumb is a signal. The algorithm registers his interest before he is even fully aware of it. A fraction of a second's delay on a headline, an extra glance at a video, and the system adjusts. The next piece of content appears, tailored more precisely than the last. His feed refines itself with each flick of his finger, learning not just what he watches, but what holds him, what unsettles him, what keeps him there. The shift is imperceptible. He still believes he is choosing, but the world he sees is already shaped around him. The content that surfaces, the truths that appear before him are not an accident. They are calculated, weighted, optimized. In the 1970s, the network executive decided which stories would make the evening news. Today, no single person decides. The process is distributed, automated, governed by the ceaseless logic of engagement. Not an editor, not a producer, but an emergent system, one that rewards outrage, cultivates certainty, and personalizes truth. Reality is an ever-splintering mirror, fragmented across a billion screens. The man scrolling his feed does not know that his version of the world is different from his neighbor's, that the news bending toward him is curving in another direction for someone else. He assumes his reality is shared, universal. He does not see the shaping force, only the end result. The year is 1981. Jean Baudrillard's pen moves across the page, carving out a warning that few will heed. Simulacra and simulation. A world where the image is no longer a reflection of reality, but a replacement for it. Where signs no longer point to something real, but instead refer only to themselves. An endless loop of meaning detached from anything solid. Outside his window, the world remains tangible. Photographs still capture moments, television still reports events, and there is, at least in theory, a boundary between the staged and the real. The mechanisms of illusion are present, but they are recognizable. Disneyland, he writes, exists to make us believe that the rest of the world is not already artificial. The simulation is beginning, but the seams are still visible. Decades later, the seams have vanished. A young man stands before a mirror, adjusting his hair, tilting his face slightly. Then he glances at his phone. The front-facing camera captures him, presenting an image that looks almost identical to the one in the mirror. Almost. It is subtle, the angles slightly sharper, the shadows beneath his eyes soften just enough to suggest a full night's sleep. The machine does not distort, it perfects. He does not even remember enabling a filter. Perhaps he never did. Perhaps this is simply the way the camera sees now. He looks back at the mirror. The reflection stares at him, uncorrected, raw. And for a fleeting second, his real face feels like the distortion. Baudrillard wrote that the world would eventually dissolve into a simulation so convincing that the difference between representation and reality would cease to matter. But today, it is not that the digital self has obscured reality, it is that reality itself has begun to feel incomplete. The version of him on the screen is not a lie, it is an optimization, a refinement. He is seeing himself the way the system has learned he should look, and why should he resist? The optimized self is rewarded. The sharper jawline, the even skin, the slightly brightened eyes, these details hold attention a fraction of a second longer. The algorithm learns. The engagement reinforces itself. He scrolls through images of others, and though none of them say it outright, the effect is clear. The line between what is real and what is expected has already blurred. To reject the optimization is to choose to be seen as less. Once a photograph was proof, a moment captured, a confirmation that something happened, someone existed in a particular place and time. Now, an image is an argument, a performance, an iteration of a self that is both real and unreal. The young man takes one last look in the mirror before stepping away. The version of himself that lingers in his mind is not the one he saw in the glass, but the one on his screen. He does not question which is more real. A factory floor hums with mechanical precision. Conveyor belts glide forward in rhythmic synchronization. Steel arms pivot and press. Sparks fly as metal meets metal. The workers, stationed along the line, each perform a single task, their movements blending into the steady pulse of industrial labor. The factory owns their time, their energy, their bodies, at least for these hours. But when the shift ends, they leave. Their labor is exchanged for wages. Their time returns to them, for now. A century later, labor looks different. A woman sits in a cafe, fingers moving across a keyboard, her eyes scanning the glowing screen. There is no factory, no visible machine. The product is not steel, not textiles, not any tangible object that moves from one set of hands to the next. The product is her, the version of herself she curates, the content she produces, the attention she gathers. She does not clock in, yet she is never off the clock. There is no foreman, no rigid schedule, yet she works constantly, posting, engaging, refining her presence. Her livelihood depends on being seen, on being relevant, on maintaining the algorithm's favor. The platform does not pay her directly, but her visibility is the currency that sustains her. She believes she is free. After all, no one tells her what to create. No supervisor dictates her hours. She is her own boss, her own brand. But the system that rewards and buries, that amplifies or silences, is not hers to control. It is opaque, shifting, unknowable. She learns its rules through trial and error, through the subtle feedback of likes and shares, of posts that soar and posts that disappear into the void. She adjusts without thinking, instinctively refining what works. She is not just working, she is training herself to be watched. Once the industrial worker sold labor by the hour, now the digital worker sells the performance of the self. Productivity is measured not in output, but in attention captured. The factory floor had walls, boundaries, an end to the shift. But this new labor stretches into every moment of waking life. It is always there, a quiet hum in the background, an ever-present awareness that she is being observed, ranked, positioned within an invisible hierarchy of relevance. All of it is collected, processed, monetized. They are not simply users, they are the raw material. Fingers resting lightly on the keyboard, he begins to type, and before he finishes the word, the system suggests a completion. He accepts without thinking. The sentence assembles itself before he has fully formed the thought. He types again. Another suggestion, another moment of quiet submission to the machine's assistance. The rhythm is seamless now, a collaboration without resistance. He hesitates just for a moment, but the words are already forming, the next phrase emerging as if plucked from his own mind. He presses the key and the machine completes the thought before he even realizes what he wanted to say. It began as convenience, a spell check, a grammar suggestion, a tool to smooth the rough edges of expression. Then it became more, a guide, a shaping force, a gentle hand steering meaning in certain directions. The system does not tell him what to write. It only predicts. It only suggests. Yet suggestion becomes habit, and habit becomes thought. The words appear, and he lets them in. Once machines needed to be programmed, instructions were explicit, rules were written. Now the system learns. It observes, adapts, refines itself through countless iterations, trained on the vast corpus of human expression. It does not need a programmer to define its purpose. It has already absorbed the patterns of language, the rhythms of discourse, the metrics of engagement. It knows what words are most likely to be accepted, what phrasing will hold attention, what structures will feel natural. He does not ask where the suggestions come from. He does not question what is being shaped beneath the surface of his own thoughts. The convenience is too seamless, too subtle. The machine does not dictate, it merely guides. The shift is imperceptible, a slight narrowing of expression, a quiet flattening of variation. The phrases that rise to the surface are those that fit, that conform, that flow most easily within the system's learned understanding of communication. He is not being censored, he is simply being nudged toward the most efficient articulation, the most frictionless exchange. And he is not alone. Across screens and keyboards, across languages and cultures, the same mechanisms are at work. The machine does not enforce uniformity, but it cultivates a certain harmony, a streamlining of human expression into patterns it recognizes, into ideas that translate smoothly across its vast neural architecture. Once, language shaped thought. Now the machine shapes language. The man continues typing. The words come more easily now, the suggestions so natural that they might as well be his own. The boundary blurs. Where does his intention end and the system's guidance begin? He does not know. And increasingly, he does not think to ask. Once we programmed machines, now the machines are programming us. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Deeper Thinking podcast, an audio essay read by me, Holly, your digital narrator. To learn more about the subjects covered today, check out the links in the show notes. Until next time.